Hi. In this presentation, I'm going to go over the questions that you all asked on the midterm. As I'll explain kind of in this presentation, I'll put together a grading rubric, but I want you to think of this class very differently. And if you're in my constitutional law class, these two classes are totally different as far as grading is concerned. So we are focusing on our research paper, and I'm going to give you feedback through Google Docs. And so as I come up with the rubric based on the work that you're doing, because I want to be realistic on what you all can do, it should be clear to you how you get an A, and then whether you're kind of in the C or B range. And my goal is to try to get you to an A. So I'm going to go over that, and then I'm also going to go over the details of the paper using my example that I'm writing. I'm doing the assignment with you. So I want to kind of just like big picture first, and that's what we mean by the forest and then the trees. Many of you are kind of focusing a little bit too much in the trees, and I'd even say you're focusing on the weeds, which are the things at the bottom of the trees. So I need you to pull back and look at the forest first. Make sure you understand the big picture, and then you start kind of breaking it down, kind of like a sculptor comes up with a statue. So let's go just over kind of the main things first. If you're feeling sick at all, or if you are overwhelmed with work, take a break, take care of your health first. My sister's a nurse, and so this is something that she's getting me to do as well. Even if you're not sick, this is a very stressful time. So make sure that you take your time to recover, and make sure you keep your priorities straight. Like I said, this paper is the only thing we're really doing in this class. I'm going to give you little tiny assignments, and then I'm going to give you video presentations to go over the course content, but I'm intentionally not doing very much course content because my single goal is to help you write better research papers and to learn how to better apply the research that you're doing to the course itself. So in many ways, this is a lot easier than it would have been if we were face-to-face as far as the level of work that we're doing. On the other hand, I agree that it's harder because we're not face-to-face. And so in the classroom, we'd be able to talk to each other, and I'd be able to get you into groups, and you'd be able to learn from each other. So what I'm doing with this class is different than the other class, but there are some similarities. And one of the similarities is this kind of thing that I think I'm inventing, where I'm having you ask these questions, and then I'm grouping the questions together so that you can see the similarities that you have. This is because I want you to understand that you're not alone. Some of the frustrations and some of the concerns you have are concerns that other students are having. I also want you to see that this is what I'm dealing with, right? So that you can and that's what you see in the classroom. You get to see me, and we can kind of interact with each other. Here, I'm just kind of trying to show you this is what I'm doing so that there's no kind of mystery here. And then I think the main thing I want to just kind of I'm very happy about is that we had 40 responses. And I think one person dropped. So I think we actually had 100% participation on this last round of work. So I feel really good about this class. And I think so far what I've seen, and I've talked to a lot of you, I think you're all doing a good job. And so I think, don't stress out. I think I want to keep our expectations reasonable. And I want to try to just really focus on doing a good job with our research because I think it's important work. And I'll talk about that a lot more this month in May, which is my favorite month because it's my birthday. But I also want to think about some of these questions that you ask are really great questions. And so I'm going to spend a little time going through these because I think everybody should think about these questions. The other thing is to think about, we're using Google Forms, and this is probably what we would have done if we were meeting face-to-face, but maybe not, right? Because I think I would have liked looking at physical drafts. I like looking at pieces of paper. That's not realistic in this environment. And so the thing I like about Google Forms is that I can comment directly on your draft. And I've done this already with about 12 or 13 students. So I think that this is proving to be the most effective way of working on this kind of work. And I've talked to a couple other teachers that have used Google Docs, and they have had the same kind of experience. So let's really try to focus on using the comment section. And it's okay if you don't know how to use the comment section and you just put like in bold, or you change the color to say like, this is the message that you want me to look at, or you can underline something, whatever you kind of need to do. And then I'm going to keep updating my example, and I'm going to go through it today. I actually made a couple updates right before doing this video. And then for my methods section, I'm going to compare a few different things. You don't have to do as many things as I did. But I'm going to watch some films and see how do they talk about law, social change, and then these issues. And I'm going to look at documentary films, but also, I'm not sure to call these fiction films, right? But you know what I mean. A regular film. And so I want to see. One I'm thinking about is like Waterworld, which is kind of an interesting film. So I think I want you to have a little bit of fun with this and really do research that you want to do. And I can show you how to turn that into a quote unquote serious project. That's part of the reason why I gave you 2 non-traditional research papers to read. The first one was about CSI science as wishful thinking. And remember, it's not science as wishful thinking, and it's not CSI. It's CSI as in the television show is putting into people's heads that this is how actual law enforcement works. And I just wanted you to see that this is an example that we can use. The second example, if you want to get a head start on, is going to be you want to find this article, which you can probably find without me doing a video, but I'll do one a little bit later. I'm not quite ready for you to all jump ahead, but if you feel like you want to, Basketball and the Key of Law is a very interesting article because it's applying legal ideas to pickup games in California. And as somebody who played basketball in pickup games, it spoke to me. I don't think you have to have played basketball to understand, but I think it's another example of just how we can just observe human behavior and then compare it to the ideals of law and just things that you'd find in a textbook. And that law is not only practiced in the courtroom, but it's also practiced in everyday life. And that's kind of the real goal I'm trying to get you to see here. So when we ask the question of how do things change, we need to be thinking about us. We need to be thinking about everyday folks. That's how things change. So if you have this idea that you can't change, it's going to be really hard for you to do this research, obviously. So I don't know, what I can do to get you to do good research to help you see that you can change and that you do change and that this situation, COVID, is causing you to change. You might not be too good at being critically aware about reflecting or even communicating these things. And that's where I can help you on certain techniques. And we'll get to that in a second. And then email me, but please email me at the Gmail account, largely because then I get it. The Kingsborough email, filters out a lot of emails. So please, Gmail. It's also easier to link this up to your Google Docs, obviously, because they're both Google products. YouTube. I have, if you go to the YouTube channel, if you go to my YouTube channel for Jason Leggett, and then you look at the playlists, this one is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So it's like UNSDG. So all of those videos are relevant to what you all are doing. And I will continue to try to upload these on the website. It's just a matter of how many things I can get done in one day with 150 students. So I'm not interested in, if you learn specific details about the quote unquote content. I don't need you to memorize the 3rd line of an article that we read. What I need to do with you is to show you how to do good research and not a book report. I think I've said this before. I'm sure there's value in doing a book report, but not when you become a junior and senior in college. And so I'm just really trying to get you to go from book report style, where you just look stuff up and then you copy and paste it, to you have to start doing actual social science. You have to start doing actual research. And if you've been in, there's other classes that they do this. Professor Better does this. Professor Parker does this. Professor Corby does this. And so I just want you to kind of like have this in your mind, and this method gives me the way of like helping you line by line. As far as grading goes, like I said, I'm going to come up with a rubric, but after I have about 20 drafts to look at, and I have about 12 or 13 right now, of who I've talked with over Google Docs. And so I'm getting a pretty good idea, but I need to see from the rest of you so I can kind of see like what would a B paper look like. And this is so that I can help everyone do as well as they possibly can. My goal would be everybody would get at least a B, depending on how much work you're willing to put in, you could get an A. So then you want to start analyzing your data and collecting your data. So if you haven't started to collect your data, this is what you need to start to do, and decide kind of how to move away from the book report, right? Like the book report would say, what are the goals? You all seem to do pretty good, right, on the midterm response, so I don't need to go into details there. And then you don't need to solve this problem. Some of you are getting a little too ambitious, right? That'd be great if we could solve problems. But social scientists don't solve problems. What we do is propose solutions. And we don't say this is the only possible solution. We say this is one of many solutions, and we analyze to see how is this realistic? So if you're looking for like the world to change because of the research you do, you're gonna fail, right? But if you say, I think I can make this minor adjustment here in this very particular area of, let's say, South Brooklyn, then sure, yeah, that's probably going to happen. Assuming, you finish the project and kind of follow my instructions, which is my main point, right? Follow my instructions. Like, don't fight me on this, right? Like, just this is one of those classes that, like, I'm teaching you to fish. So if I give you like I give you a fishing pole, and then you're like, well, why do I need a fishing pole? Well, this is going to take all day just to get you to accept the idea that you need a fishing pole to fish. Now, do you have to have a fishing pole to fish? No, you can go into the river with your bare hands and try to catch a fish. But let's say you're paying me to teach you how to fish. I think you'd realize like, you don't need to do the thing that you already know how to do. Anybody can put their hands into the river, but you might not know how to use a fly fishing rod, and that's what you're paying me to do. So you're paying me, or somebody's paying me, right? The government's paying me. The state of New York is paying me. So follow my instructions. Just like do what I say. That will make this go so much quicker. And again, it's kind of like if you go to the gym, right? I'm teaching you how to use like a new weight system or a new running technique, right? And so you're not really going to feel it. You're not going to understand it until you're done. When you're done with this and then you look back and you look at your paper and you say, oh, okay, I get it. That's how this kind of works. And then finally, I'm just going to update the course website with new context next week. So I'm going to try to get as much of it done over the weekend as possible. On the right-hand side, I've given you what I think would be a good way to just kind of like start your paper. So this is how I started you all off. And then just kind of keep your notes. And this can go like a page or two at the top. This isn't going to be your final paper. At the end, you're going to either delete this or copy it into a new document if you really want to keep it. But I'm just kind of showing you, this is how people who are good at writing papers, this is what they do. They kind of organize everything at the beginning, and then they start to write their paper. Their paper follows this, in other words. And so it kind of keeps them focused and keeps them on track. So I have already given you all this information, but here's me following my own advice, right? So I identify my global injustice, and I'm doing this for a couple other projects in my own life. And so I'm looking at two different ones. You only need to look at one. And I've been studying these two issues for over 10 years, so I'm very familiar with them. Then I identify my variables here, right? So I'm really focused on information and action. How do those things really go together? And this is called conceptual change. And then I've brainstormed, right? I'm looking at how do you have like action in a specific location, right? And my location is going to be South Brooklyn. And then how do people, who are oftentimes not thinking about either participating in their local environment or thinking about global issues, or they do, but they think about it mostly through the news or through what they see on their webpage when they log in, right? And so we need a good theory for research, learning, and action to come together. And there's good theories of each of those three things. There's good research theory, there's good learning theory, and there's good action theory. But there's not a lot of good theories that bring the three things together. And it's largely because not a lot of people do that research because, I think, from talking to other people, it's hard. It's not easy. And so I just wanted to try to use this example to show you what I'm doing. And so there is one theory that has come out in the last 10 years. And critical participatory action research, or CPAR, is fairly old. It's been around for several decades. And it largely has worked in education fields. So a lot of younger teachers now are familiar with this concept, and it's pretty kind of cool to meet younger teachers who are teaching like 8th grade and they know about this. A lot of older professors, however, have no idea what this is because it's very different than kind of the work that they did when they went to school, 100 years ago. No, I mean, it was like 50 years ago. But digital is now, like, obviously, if you're under the age of 40, you understand this, right? This is the digital world that we're talking about. So we just take the principles of CPAR and we put them up with the digital world. And this is the work I've been doing now for about 10 years. And so, or I guess for exactly 10 years. So I'm just kind of showing you how this can work through this paper. And I hope this kind of influences your thinking about what education can do and about how you can participate in the future. I think a lot of people, when they hear participate, they think of two things, voting and protesting. But with digital media, there's a lot of other ways that you can participate. And explicitly, more important to me is sharing information, right? Because that's like sharing knowledge. So if knowledge is power, well, it's only power if enough people actually have it. And then I wanted to show you this idea of the perfect paragraph, right? And this is where I'm really hoping to accomplish with all of you, right? So some of you will get further in your papers than other, and to be blunt, right? Some of you will find this easier and you'll do better. And that doesn't mean that, if you struggle that you're not going to get an A. It just means that for some of you, this will be really difficult. So this is the one area I'm really hoping that you do well in, because if you do well with the perfect paragraph, or what I call the perfect paragraph, then you're going to do better on most of your papers. And so your first sentence really needs to be a topic sentence, and I will provide more help for that for those of you who need it. And I'll go into like excruciating detail, but it's not that complicated, right? And you'll see an example of mine in the next slide. Or in a future slide. The next thing is a transition. So I usually don't write the transition sentence, the second sentence, until I've written my thesis, which you see above in bold. And then I've written, like, what is my plan? How am I going to prove my thesis? And so I usually leave this blank, or I just put myself a little reminder, this is my transition. But I usually, this is like the last sentence I ever write. Then I always put my references or my works cited, right? So works cited is a Chicago manual style. References is the APA style guide. I want you to use the APA style guide. If you've taken Dr. Chapman, he has you use the APA style guide. This is a common practice as you move forward. I know many of you used a different format in your English classes, but writing an English paper and writing a social science paper, they use different style guides. Why they do that, I have no idea, right? I mean, I can guess, but that wouldn't really be worth your time. So I usually do this right away, and then I'm able to kind of keep track of what I'm doing. And I want to just point out here that you see the Sustainable Development Goals. I think everybody should use this report. And you should put the www URL up there. I just didn't have time to get to it this morning. And so I'm going to add that, but not at this precise moment. And so my cat is climbing on the refrigerator. Okay. And then a lot of people ask this question, so I'm going to repeat it a few times. So as I've stated numerous times in this class, 5 pages with a table, no more than 11 without a table. Here are the sections of the paper, and then I think you should do the same thing I did, right? Have a title, and then put your name by your name, right? And put that in it's like middle text, right, when you're selecting your formatting. Let's get through the easy questions first, and you can read the questions on the left-hand side as I read the answers. So a good paper always gets the right amount of research to support your position. So it's never a matter of the number of sources or the length of the material. It's always a matter of how much you're able to process. So don't pick 19 sources if you can only process 2 of them. And by process, like read it, understand it, and be able to explain it, okay? So don't pick 20 movies if you can only watch 2, okay? And so it's basically, that's what I kind of mean here. So you have to be able to like really be clear about what you're doing. So pick your data very carefully, whether it's a research article, whether you're going to interview people, whether you're going to look at statistics, whether you're going to look at films, movies, music, poetry, art, photographs, like whatever you're looking at, don't pick too much of it and make sure it's stuff that you understand, right? You can push yourself, but don't go crazy here. None of us are going to win an award from our research paper. We'll learn a lot, right? But we want to be realistic. And then, I think, look, some great research papers have only looked at a single poem that is less than 1 page long, and they're awesome research papers, okay? And then some really terrible, I've read some really bad research papers by people who get paid money, and they had lots of sources, and they looked at thousands of pages of documents, but it was clear that they didn't understand them. And so, it's like, don't just throw stuff in there because you think that you're going to impress me, because you're not going to impress me. The better you understand and come up with like real practical solutions that can be implemented, those are the papers that are going to impress me, and it's going to show me that you're a deep thinker. Now, this question's interesting, right? No, I'm not going to do that. But it's you have to make these choices, right? And so there are things that anytime you choose to look at one thing, you're not looking at something else. So maybe I'll revisit this when I explain this part, but it's like if I'm looking at Waterworld, the film, then I'm not looking at some other film. And that's my choice, right? So there's something I think that is interesting about this film that will inform us about how people think about these issues. So I can't tell you what you should be doing. I can help you. Once you get started, I can totally help you. But you have to kind of take the lead here. So it's like if I'm your running coach and you're asking me how to run, I might push you, right? Like run. And then I'll help you as you're running. But you need to start kind of getting ahead here. I don't think you have to change your inquiry or thesis. Some of you might want to, and that's fine. I'm not going to like look at your final paper and say, what happened? It's not a big deal to change. People change their theses and their inquiry questions constantly. And that's probably a good thing. As you start a research project, you have pretty broad ideas. You're not all that clear. As you start to do more research, you start to learn more, and you can be clearer on what you're doing. So yeah, I think specifically, the 2 policies that you raise here, and I think we've spoken to each other over Google Docs, these are evidence, and this is great evidence. This is your data that you're analyzing. And so it probably will change your conclusions, right? But it shouldn't change your inquiry, I don't think. But, we can talk and you can tell me what you think. I think like if you can't remember your inquiry question or you don't like it anymore, just go into a new one. And this kind of the same thing with like the specifics of your inquiry or your research. Let's talk, but it needs to be something that you care about, that needs to be really important to you. But like I said, I'm happy to talk more. Of course, use as many sources as you want, just cite them. And then make sure you're using APA style. So if it's a website, you need to make sure you know how to use that. I will help you with this, and I will do a video just kind of talking about these details. But again, you need to get started. And so the easiest way is just copy and paste the browser link, right? Put that into your Google Draft, and then it makes it easier for me to help you. I think this is a great inquiry question. I'm working on a project like this with some other folks about homelessness here in New York City. It's a good question. So I'd love to hear what you think. And, let's start with the basics. Like, people need to eat 3 meals a day. So one thing I know from past experience is pre-K programs provide young people with at least 1 meal a day. So could we have a pre-K system for homeless folks? It's something to think about. I don't have all the answers. So I'd like to see many of your suggestions. When is the first draft of the paper due? Interesting question, right? Because I think ideally you'll have a full draft by May 21st. I'm just thinking, like, if I were you and I needed a couple weeks to revise before finals hit, I would want to have a draft done by the 21st. And that gives us a little over 3 weeks. That's plenty of time to write a paper like this. So on the other hand, if you're using Google Docs, then I can kind of see how you're doing. So some of you might get a draft done sooner. And if you get a draft done a little bit later, it might be okay because you're getting feedback from me. All right, complicated questions. The first one, I'm just going to do, it's such a good question that I'm going to do a video lecture on it because it's something that I think is super important and is so often misunderstood. And so it would be easier for me to answer this question with pictures and then to talk over that picture. I do have a introduction to the legal system, meaning the court system in the United States, video on YouTube, which might be helpful. But I think that the one I'll make for this particular question will be more helpful. I think the easiest place to start would be with a case called Texas versus Lawrence and looking for Justice Kennedy and how he uses international law in that case. And you can just do a Wikipedia or a Google search of that, or I'm sure there's probably a YouTube. Again, it's Texas versus Lawrence. But then I would also want to look at the other side of it. That's Kennedy's using the law as a Supreme Court justice, using the international law and human rights law in particular. But then there's Justice Scalia, who feels like you shouldn't ever use international law. So you can see there's a debate there. I think that's a very unreasonable position that he's taking. And it might be super ideal. It'd be lovely if we could always solve every problem using the United States law, but it would also be lovely if the United States wasn't all over the world. So I think the fact that we live in this kind of global world and this pandemic has kind of proved this. I don't think you can put your head in the sand and pretend that, you can only use the law from South Brooklyn and that's it. So I think, it's a difficult question and I'll spend more time on it. I love this next question because the person is actually thinking about themselves. So they're placing themselves within the research, which is my main goal here. And you're clearly using actor network theory. My short answer would be something like, try to think about the people you can work with right now. What my friend and I always say is, who are our allies or our cheerleaders? And those people probably don't need convincing, but you need to be able to explain what you want to them, and they'll help you with that. Then you need to identify the group that's kind of in the middle. They're likely to help you, but they just don't know enough about the topic. And so with your allies, you can go talk to those people. Now, my friend and I are on two different sides of this. She thinks that you should basically go talk to your enemies, the people who are trying to get in your way. If you feel like you can do that, and she can definitely do that, and it's worth the mental, health risks that are involved in talking to difficult people, then go for it. But on the other hand, I don't have any time for them. And so I think about it like the biblical story of Noah and the ark. I'm going to build the ark, and you're welcome to come onto my ark. But if you're going to sit there and badmouth my ark, I don't want you on my ark. So learn how to swim, as the famous Tool song goes. There's also specific for this person. I can send this to you through email or through your Google Doc, but you could also just look up this person, Eleanor Ostrom. She's a political scientist who's been looking at this question for a long time, and she's got lots of great answers. But the first thing you need to see is there are different types of people. So some people are rational egoists. They're selfish and they only look out for themselves. But a lot of people are what are called conditional cooperators. They will actually cooperate with you if there are incentives and they think that it's a norm, right? Like it's a social kind of benefit from doing it. And then there are people, and I'd put myself in this category, who they're called altruists, right? And so we kind of serve two functions. We make the change. We do the change. The other thing that we do is we work with people who are skilled, right? So they have the set of skills. So I don't necessarily need everybody to be a carpenter to come help me build my boat to escape a flood. I'm going to look for, and there's this famous story, if you want to look this up in Greek culture, but it's Jason and the Argonauts, right? He goes and he finds the team of folks that are going to help him on his quest. And that's more important to me. And Eleanor Ostrom talks a lot about this, is that change makers are people who are able to find people who are good at things that they're not good at. And so I think in all the situations where I have successfully made a social change through the law or through politics, which I find to be the same thing, it's because I have a good team around me, not because I argued with somebody for a long time. I think you should answer the question here about global warming in the future. It's a great question, but it's a complicated question. And so you need to be like, how will global warming affect or impact what, right? Let me put it this way. Right now, with actual literal warming, and in particular the ocean in the Arctic warming, countries like Russia, the United States, and others are now exploring oil drilling. They're going to drill for oil in Antarctica. And they're able to do this because of the melting of the ice caps. And so how will that impact humans? I think there's two things, right? There'll be more oil, although right now we don't need more oil, right? That's been the big issue. But secondly, there'll probably be some kind of a conflict there. Everyone is claiming possession of that area. And so how are they going to resolve this conflict? But on the other hand, if you think using the same example, polar bears have either been going extinct, starving to death, floating on floating ice, but in some, I think, hilarious situations, they've gone into parts of northern Russia and Sweden and started breaking into people's garbage bins and eating the garbage. So it's like really hard to predict, unless I know exactly what you mean, right? And then also you have to be careful about time scale. It's a lot easier to predict what's going to happen in the next 5 years than it is to predict what's going to happen in the next 25 to 30. The next question, also I think really interesting, but you need to be very clear. One of the research projects I look at, we're actually, my research partner and I, Professor Parker, we're looking 5,000 years ago. But we're looking at intervals of time and how human beings kind of adapted to their environment. And we've been doing this for a long time. You might want to look at 2,000 years ago. When the quote-unquote founding fathers were writing the Constitution, they looked back 2,000 years ago to see what the Greeks did. So you can look back and you can compare it to what people are doing now. I'd have to know a little bit more about what you're thinking in order to give you good advice on that. So, it depends on your research. I think this person did a great job in their inquiry question, right? How can I prove education is a powerful tool to make many changes in our society? Because if all people are educated, they won't let other people use them without their rights. They will be able to fight back in many different ways. I hope you're in my constitutional law class, POL 66. For those of you who are, this is Power 3. When one group is trying to use knowledge of law against another group who lacks knowledge of law, and then they are successful, that changes the whole environment. So the definitions of law and order are changed because of this balance of knowledge. So let me rephrase your question to be a more assertive statement or a thesis statement. And that would be, education is a powerful tool because those who are educated about their rights are more likely to fight back in many different ways when they are abused. And then now you'd want to give examples. And I wouldn't give too many examples. I'd only give maybe one or two. This would be a good place to find like a news story or a film or a music, right? Lyrics. Can I include graphs? Probably. Put them in the draft in Google Docs as quickly as possible, and make sure you cite to them unless you made them. And if you made them, there's a specific format in the APA style guide, but just to be simple for now, just put table created and then put your name. And then, can you focus on one country? Yeah, it depends, right? So let me know what country you're thinking about, because some countries probably, like St. Lucia, for example, I think you could focus on just one education system, or even Cuba. The United States, on the other hand, has a federalist system. So there's 50 different state education systems. Then there's the federal government, and there's like 3 or 4 different arguments about how that should go. And then each state has multiple, dozens of systems within it. And so you're talking about thousands of systems across the country. So I just need a little bit more information on what you're thinking. Okay, these are questions that I've already answered, so I'm not going to spend very much time. So I'm just going to go through the answers. 5 pages with the table, no more than 11 without a table. 5 of you asked this question. So I hope you got it. If and if, okay? If you're not using Google Docs, this is going to be way harder. I can work with you. We'll figure something out, but you're making it a lot harder. So I think it's pretty simple to use Google Docs these days. If you need help with that, then let me know. But that goes back to slide 1. Email me. See my example, and that I'm giving you and explaining here, and that I've provided for you. But also go back through those YouTube videos, because I answer these questions. Your inquiry needs to be something you care about. So I'm going to kind of leave you that there. The UN does reports, and so you should look for as many of those reports as you can. That's a great place to start. And so, like I said, what I liked about those reports is for each section, they're only like 1 or 2 pages long. And I think that's all you need to get started. I don't think you need to be an expert on the United Nations goals. You may if you want. And then I already went through this one, so I'm going to skip that. Let's Zoom, right? Anybody who wants to Zoom, let's start setting up some Zooms over the next few weeks. But this group in particular, I totally agree. It's very difficult to get an A+, okay? Let's shoot for an A- for most of you. If you want an A+, let's Zoom and let's talk about how to make that happen. I agree with you. I think it's very difficult. But, we don't have a choice. So let's do the best we can. I need some of you, I don't think you're quite understanding what we're doing here. So you asked these questions, so let's Zoom and talk about it so that we can get on the same page. I'm a bit confused about some of these questions at the bottom, so let's talk to each other and try to figure them out. Google Docs, right? So I thought this was a great question because it's about Google Docs. So if you're going to do anything different than what I'm suggesting here, we can probably make that work. But it's so much easier. I'm giving you an example of somebody I've already been talking to. See how easy it is for me to talk to them. So I think this is just the best solution. So Google Docs makes this a lot easier. And that kind of goes back to that other question. I think in some ways we might be able to do not the same. And let's be honest, we're not going to do the same as if we were meeting face to face. But I think we can do okay. I think we can do pretty good with this approach. Now, I think this is interesting. I like these questions. There are good resources in the world, right? So if you Google search Purdue OWL, that's a writing center that people have used for 20, 30 years. And it's got a lot of information on it. So I would start there. I don't know if they have a YouTube channel, but if they do, maybe I'll subscribe and throw some stuff into our playlist. Personally, my number 1 and number 2, if you really want to be a good writer and there is lots of data out there that suggests that the better writer you are, the more money you're going to make. In my own personal life, I have found that to be true. If money is important to you. I come from a working class background. I was the first in my family to go to college and graduate from college. I was the first to go to law school. So I think I couldn't have done that without writing practice. And I got my best writing from my 8th grade writing teacher, Oswald was her last name. But really, this book called The Borzoi Handbook for Writers, and it also, I think even better, has a practice book. Especially if English is not your first language, I think this is a very helpful book. So, and I'm happy to give you other suggestions. The other thing is there's a book called The Elements of Style. This is more for like once you're done, and you can Google this, just put Elements of Style, Strunk and White, PDF. You can get a free copy of this. This is more for like after you've written your paper, use this as a guide to see like what mistakes. There's the section in that book called Common Mistakes. Your teachers grade you down most of the time because you make these mistakes. I didn't learn about this book until I was a junior in college, and it was written in big red ink at the top of my paper. And my teacher was just helping me see that I was making mistakes that everybody made, and there's no good reason to. So once you kind of fix these 2 or 3 mistakes, and there's like 50 of them, but most people make like 3 or 4 of them are the same. Then you do better. But really at the end of the day, like one big myth that people have before they come to college and graduate from college is that people are born with things. Unless you're born like 7 foot tall and coordinated, right? So that's going to be something you have to practice too. There's plenty of people who are super tall, but they can't play basketball. You have to practice. And the hard part is like bad practice. Like if you practice bad habits, you're going to write a bad paper, and you're going to, and that's why when students say like, oh, we're lazy, I don't know. People in New York work really hard. So it could be that you're just not practicing right. Like you're not practicing well. Like you keep writing papers, but you're not improving, right? Like you're not practicing the things that you need to practice. So that's why I'm really kind of taking our time and really like breaking this down into pieces. Now, on the other hand, right, this person like is showing me that they're really thinking about it. Now, we've talked to each other, right? But this is great research. Like it's not like great research doesn't typically happen because you read a book and then you copy and paste it, or you read a website and you copy and paste it. That's not real great research because it's not very good thinking. You interviewing somebody, you watching a film, you taking 2 or 3 things that appear to be different than showing how they're similar, you doing thinking, that's good research. And then this is a question that's on everybody's mind, right? How do we relate the coronavirus pandemic and the government response and social response, right? How people are behaving to education? I'm trying, right? I keep bringing up this whole idea of we live in a global world, right? So, and many of you are like, duh, right? Many of you are immigrants or come from immigrant families, and so this is common sense to you. But education, 80% of the people who are in education who teach K through 12 are not from immigrant families, and they're not people of color. And so they take a lot of things for granted, and they tend to just see things through their own worldview. And so what I'm trying to do is work with folks to think bigger, to think more globally, and to think about multiple points of view, especially when it comes to culture. Now, here's my example. And again, I provided this to you, and I'll provide an updated version sometime this week. But I just wanted to show you, right? The introduction doesn't have to be 100 pages long. I just introduce the 2 things I'm looking at, and I make my kind of observations. And then I put my thesis statement, which is in bold. And that's really all you have to do. Immediately, I go into the method, right? This is the data collection. So I start off with quoting from the Cruz article, showing that, well, this is how she was kind of explaining, like when we think about like why people don't act, right? Well, they're not processing information correctly. So I don't really want people to act, right? Let me give an example. Like on the one hand, you see kind of, let me pick on two different political groups here. So you got let's say the liberal progressives, and I really think these are moderate Democrats, right? They're complaining about folks in Michigan and other places who are protesting because they want to go back to work. But the people who are protesting, a lot of them need to go back to work in order to pay for their bills. So you have like the people on the right wing that are saying, oh, these liberal progressives are idiots. And then you have the people on the left wing saying these right wing conservatives are idiots. I think a good paper would be maybe both of them are idiots because neither side is listening to each other. Neither side is engaging in dialogue, and neither one is accepting the fact that both are realities, right? People are going to die because infected people go out into the world, right? And are not socially isolating. But people are also going to die if they can't pay their bills and they have healthcare problems. I mean, all these other things. So it's like, this is where government is supposed to come in. This is where law and conflict resolution are supposed to come in. They're supposed to be helping these people have a good conversation. But on the other hand, right, like both sides of this argument aren't processing information very well. So I'm more interested in what's wrong with their learning. How come they're not, and a lot of these people are educated people. Why are they not learning very well? Why aren't they sharing knowledge very well? And that's where I'd look at. And I think the CSI Science is Wishful Thinking article kind of explains this. Well, a lot of them are getting quote unquote news from not very good news sources. And so, and these days news seems to be just arguing with itself. And so I think like this idea of like everybody wants to blame somebody is not very smart. So I'd put it that way. So what I'm looking at then is I'm trying to see, okay, we can't make social change through the law unless people know about the law, know about what their options are, and then start having conversations with each other that are based in knowledge, not based in knee-jerk reactions and emotions. And so I'm looking at very kind of concrete data here, right? So I'm looking at previous responses that students have given me about these situations, because I think the more people who are thinking about this, the better. And it's easier for me to work with students because we're thinking about these things together. But I want to compare, because that's a little bit biased, right? Because we're all kind of thinking about something, we're sharing the same language. And bias is okay, but we want to compare that to something else. And so this is something else would be films, which I have no control over, right? And so how do they talk about it? And then I want to compare, how do I talk about it? And then how do the films talk about it? And then I want to compare that to news coverage, right? As I just explained, it seems to be kind of hypocritical and contradictory. So I want to see, is that true? And is that more like how we talk about it, or is it more how like the films talk about it, or is it different? And then finally, I want to look at your work and see how are we framing this information, because that's going to tell me how we can learn together to solve these problems. Now, you don't need to do as much as I am doing, right? I've been doing this a long time. I just wanted to show you, like, those are 4 different sets of data. You only need to look at one set. So you could do any of those things that I did, and we can work on, or other things, right? You don't have to do the same thing I did. But you can kind of see how this works. And then I tell you what theories I'm using, right? So I'm using analysis that comes from, as I told you in my thesis, critical participatory action research. And if you're interested in this research, by the way, you could just Google Michelle Fine from the CUNY Graduate Center. And you could look this also on YouTube. She's got a lot of work, but I've worked with her and I think she's great. Conceptual change is a little bit more complicated. It comes from physics education. And then Law and Society Scholarship is my main source of information. And this is something that I've been working on for a long time, and this is how I was educated. This is also a major option when you go to John Jay, for those of you going to John Jay, and I have some friends up there that teach, and we're working together to try to better integrate criminal justice and law and society, for those of you who are interested. And then I I transition into the next session, which is the method analysis. And this is where we're going to apply what I call the 3 I's of law. And this comes from a man named Michael McCann, and then also another who got that from a guy named E.P. Thompson. But when people are talking about the law, they're usually only talking about one of these 3 things. And it's either institution, the institution of law, either the instrument of law, or either the ideology of law. And so what we want to do is bring them together, right? We want to see, well, what are people saying when we look at all three of these things together? And then I asked like 2 specific questions that come from my own research. And this helps me think about how we could address this really big global problem just here in Brooklyn, right? In South Brooklyn in particular. And then you're going to make a table. And in my the document I shared with you, right, I'm looking at 4 different data sets. But I just wanted to show you in this clip, right, this is all your table would look like. So don't be super scared. You're just say what your evidence source is. So the first one I'm going to get done and upload for you all. I've been looking at over 200 student responses for 4 years about how people think about injustice. And so I'm going to analyze the language, the symbols, and the ideology, and so are you. Right? And you'll remember we did that, if you remember, right? We did that on the first week of class. And I'll help you do that again. But you just want to like literally, like when we say analyze the language, we mean 2 things. We mean what are the words that they're using? So what words do they use most frequently? And then how are they kind of constructing their language, right? How are they framing the issue is the words we use. Symbols, we mean, remember, like we looked at the justice is blind, like that kind of symbol of law. If you've never looked at something called the Standard, which is the eagle in the United States, and it's really a lot in the Senate, the United States Senate, you should Google that and look at the Roman concept of the Standard, the eagle, and learn all about that symbol. And symbols are super important in law, as I'm sure you're aware. Handcuffs, right? There's all sorts of symbols that you can think about. And then ideology is really like the result of the language and the symbols. And so we want to think of like the mental model is another word for ideology. How are people thinking about this? I think a bad way of explaining this is psychology, but many of you seem to know something about psychology. So we just want to go beyond psychology. Psychology is a little limited, not a lot of science, right? The science was kind of old science. Now people are they're using with something called cognitive studies. And so that's, it's psychology is a little old now. It's kind of like an antiquated way of looking at the world, although a very popular one, and people get paid plenty of money to listen to people's problems. The next section is all about the legal evidence, and this one will be pretty hard, but so I'm not going to grade you harshly on this. I just want you to try. Some of you will do well on this, and we'll see what the difference is, but here I'm just like laying it out for you. I just want you to see that, like, if people suffer a harm, they can sue. And I'm laying this out here so that you kind of understand it. And then we'll apply the federal rules of evidence to see, well, but what evidence can they use if they're going to sue? And this worked really well in my class, this same class, 67, last semester, when we had an in-class trial. And folks really kind of saw the difference between evidence that would be admissible, that would actually get in to the court, and then most of it won't get in. And so this is going to help us think about how do we make good arguments using the law, which is very different than like an English class. And so that's the place I'm really going to be using class content. The next one now is we're going to analyze our table. Okay, so we're going to go into a little bit. This would be called a discussion section if you were writing like a 12-page paper or longer. And so this one's going to be your informed opinion on how likely you think a judge is going to accept your information. So for those of you who are skeptical about social change, this is where you would make that argument. You'd say, I don't think a judge is going to believe this argument because... but one thing you want to say in this section is, on the other hand, it is possible the judge might accept this evidence because. And so you kind of see the 2 sides there. And that's what we mean by an adversarial system, or prosecutor versus defense, or plaintiff versus defense. And it's plaintiff versus respondent for those of you who are really interested in the legal language. You want to see basically how we're framing this issue so that there's more than 2 sides. And so there's one side versus another side, and then there's the judge's opinion. And then that's also based on the opinions you got from the research community. So we have 4 or more opinions, And that's really how law works. And I'm going to show you this technique called abduction or legal reasoning in a couple weeks after you kind of get some of this research done. And then the last one is really like the easiest section. You're just going to reflect on this process, everything you've learned, and you're going to tell me what does this mean to you now about legal education. And many of you are actually making pretty good progress on this kind of like as you're working. And so I'm not too worried about this last section. Now, let me just repeat. Use Google Docs. Go to your draft and start working. This is hard to explain, but if you go to your Google account and then you go to Google Docs, you have the document you shared with me, but all you have to do is push, there's like two people side by side. You push that little button, it shows you all the documents you've ever shared with anybody. And so it'll have my name there. That's the one that I have. And so when you start working on that document, it will alert me if you leave a comment. So if you push add comment in your document, it goes to my email and says you've put a comment there. So I can kind of, keep track of what you're doing that way. I'm also just kind of dropping in on the papers. And then next week I'll start emailing folks who I haven't heard from, and we'll have to try to figure something else out. But hopefully you'll email me first and we can get to work. I might edit some of your papers with you just to kind of show you, right, how to do this. And I'll probably change the text to red, or I'll underline it so you can kind of see what the difference is. And then I'll usually probably give you a suggestion of where to look for more information, or to have you try to do something on your own. Email me if you need something, and email me at the Gmail. We can always Zoom. So it's harder for me to do a Zoom in the constitutional law class, but in this class, it's easier for me to Zoom with you. So if you're in both, and I've talked to a couple of you actually already, if you're in my 66 and 67 class, we can Zoom and talk about both classes, okay? And if for some reason you can't use Zoom, we can try Google Chat, which is also Duo if we want to do the video version. And I'm gonna send out an invitation for Google or Blackboard Collaborate probably for next week. I just have to figure out. I used it for something else. I wasn't too impressed, but I might try it just to see how it works with students. It didn't work very well with faculty, but there's just a lot of problems with the program. But I know that some other teachers have used it, and so we'll give it a shot. It would be nice to be able to talk to 5 or 6 of you at a time. I think that's important so that you can talk to each other. But it's a hard thing to do in this time because not everybody has the same time available. So I'm trying to be respectful of your time. And if you haven't sent me a Google Doc, send me a Google Doc. Almost all of you have, though. All right, thanks. Be safe, be well, and have fun with this paper. Try not to be stressed. Watch a movie.